Hello people, welcome back to The Struggle, where we dive deep into the most effective ideas, stories, theories and strategies for overcoming life's challenges. To struggle is to make forceful efforts to break free from restriction. Together we'll figure out how you're restricted and explore how you can struggle to break free, find meaning and grow through whatever adversity you're facing. Maybe the answer is to stop struggling altogether and accept life as it is. Maybe some areas of your life require voluntary struggle. Either way, this podcast will help guide you towards fulfillment and freedom. This is episode 54. And what if I told you that fear and hope are two sides of the same illusion, both keeping you from taking action? In this episode, I'll break down a powerful passage from Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching that challenges everything we think about success, failure, and the unknown. We'll explore why fear paralyzes us, why hope can be just as dangerous, and how embracing uncertainty is the key to real growth. If you've ever felt stuck, waiting, hesitating, or overthinking, this episode is for you. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by the Struggle newsletter. This is a fortnightly newsletter that complements the podcast nicely, in which I send out every other Sunday a short article concerning the art of embracing struggle. We are all restricted in some way, and we could all do with struggling to break free from whatever restricts us. The struggle is different for everyone, but I can assure you the Struggle newsletter and this podcast will help you discover what it is that is restricting you and how you can best struggle to break free from that restriction. If you're finding it difficult to be more productive, to be healthy, to achieve your goals, perhaps you're chasing the wrong thing. Because a lot of us believe that we should be aiming for happiness, but this is an unwise pursuit because happiness comes and goes without any control from us. However, there is a way to be more fulfilled with life, and that is to embrace the struggle. Maybe it's exercising for you, maybe it's being healthy, maybe it's having uncomfortable conversations, maybe it's taking a career risk, maybe it's discovering who you are, paying attention to your feelings, or to be autonomous. And that's why I created a newsletter, to help you discover where you could be struggling more and where you could become more fulfilled. Along with the article, I also provide tips, strategies and recommendations such as podcasts, movies, music and recipes to help along the way. So to sign up completely for free, go to gregorthomson.com, the link will be in the show notes, confirm your subscription, and then check your spam folder for your welcome newsletter, and then add me to your contacts to continue to receive it in your inbox for free. And that's it. You're on your way to productively struggling more and being more healthy, motivated, and fulfilled. Now, let's get on with the struggle. One of the most profound works of philosophy ever written is Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, often translated as the classic of the way and virtue. Written over 2 millennia ago, it remains one of the most widely translated works in history, among the most translated after the Bible. Given its enduring influence, it stands to reason that its 81 chapters contains deep philosophical wisdom. And indeed it does. Now I want to explore one passage in particular, and it goes like this. Success is as dangerous as failure. Hope is as hollow as fear. What does it mean that success is as dangerous as failure? Whether you go up the ladder or down it, your position is shaky. When you stand with your 2 feet on the ground, you will always keep your balance. What does it mean that hope is as hollow as fear? Hope and fear are both phantoms that arise from thinking of the self. When we don't see the self as self, what do we have to fear? It's remarkable how words written over 2,000 years ago still resonate today. This passage reveals a profound truth. There are risks and trade-offs in every aspect of life. Consider the choice between staying in a well-paid job or pursuing a creative ambition. If you leave stability behind to chase a dream, you risk failure in pursuit of success. You trade financial security for the possibility of a more meaningful and potentially more lucrative future. But if you remain in a job you feel no passion for, you risk succeeding for fear of failure. You trade personal fulfillment for stability, and in doing so, you might just deprive the world of your passion and creativity. Pursuing an ambitious goal requires embracing uncertainty. Now, it feels counterintuitive, or even uncomfortable, because it's often easier to endure a certain hardship than to step into the unknown. As Tim Ferriss put it, people will choose unhappiness over uncertainty. The familiarity of an unfulfilling life often feels safer than the risk of failing at something meaningful. Psychologists call this the Yerkes-Dodson Law, which states that too little stress or challenge leads to apathy or inaction. We become comfortable in the certainty of inaction, even if that inaction is unfulfilling. But on the flip side of this, too much challenge or stress can lead to anxiety and paralysis. We scare ourselves into inaction. We freeze from the stress we inflict upon ourselves. Therefore, we must find the right amount of discomfort, the kind that comes from stepping into the uncertain and the unknown rather than jumping wholly into it. This is where optimal performance and growth lie. This is where we want to be, neither hoping for an imagined future that keeps us from acting, nor fearing failure or what others will think to such an extent that we're stressed or anxious and don't act out of this fear. We must therefore climb the ladder, accept that it is shaky and it will always be shaky, but we can keep our balance so long as we don't hold ourselves to too high expectations, freezing ourselves into inaction. The paradox is that uncertainty feels like danger, but it is actually necessary for success. I can put it simply, when I wake up at 6 a.m. for work, it can sometimes feel daunting in the darkness of the flat and when I'm by myself. But in order to get ready for the day, in order to succeed at getting ready for the day, I must endure the uncertainty of the darkness. Of course, this is a very simple example, but we can scale this up to our lives. The darkness can be concerning, but in reality, there's most likely nothing scary to be found there. And our imaginations so often create scarier possibilities than our realities. If you never step into discomfort, you'll never grow. And so the key, of course, is to find the balance. Enough risk to challenge yourself, but not so much that it overwhelms you. When we aim upwards, we step into the unknown, into the darkness, in search of light. We must be comfortable in that darkness to find that light. Tony Robbins once said, "The quality of your life is in direct proportion to the amount of uncertainty you can comfortably live with." If you can make peace with the unknown, you will find a greater sense of purpose. The fear of uncertainty is largely an illusion, just as fear of the dark is an illusion. Most of the time, there's nothing lurking there. It's like the quote often attributed to Mark Twain, "I am an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened." Our minds are incredibly skilled at imagining worst-case scenarios that never materialize. We often scare ourselves into inaction. Isn't it remarkable how the same ideas are refined and repeated throughout history and throughout the world? Because over 2,000 years ago, in a completely different continent, the Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote about the exact same problem. He called it premeditatio malorum. This is the practice of mentally preparing for worst-case scenarios in order to strip them of their power. When we prepare for the worst-case scenarios, rather than simply ruminating over them, those scenarios aren't as scary, and it's likely that those scenarios never come to fruition anyway. Seneca put it like this: "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." The human mind is also incredibly talented at catastrophizing. An untamed mind can fabricate horror stories about what could go wrong, but these fears are illusions unlikely to occur. How many times have you been worried about something like being embarrassed in front of others or being rejected when asking someone out, only to realize after that the fear itself was worse than the actual event? And even if you were rejected, it's never as horrifying as you make it out to be in your head. And that rejection is experience which emboldens you to dust yourself off and try again. This is precisely what the Tao Te Ching warns against. Fear and hope are both phantoms, illusions created by the mind. Fear paralyzes us into inaction, and hope can be so very enticing. It can be so comforting that it makes us complacent. But reality is so often much less dramatic than our thoughts imagine. And modern psychology even backs this up, with research showing that 85% of the things people worry about never actually happen. And even when those bad things do happen, the vast majority of people report that they handled them better than they expected. The Stoics had a simple practice for handling fear. Instead of running from it, instead of distracting yourself from it, instead of failing to act, confront the fear directly. Imagine consciously the absolute worst that could happen, but instead of panicking, accept it. When you confront the worst case scenario, it loosens its grip on you, and you'll be more likely to act in spite of that fear. It's not about relinquishing the fear or distracting yourself from the fear, it's acting in the face of fear. Tim Ferriss has a similar practice called fear setting, in which we imagine the worst case scenario, define the fear, then answer 2 questions. What can I do to prevent these fears from occurring? And if they do occur, how can I fix them? And then we consider the cost of inaction. This allows us to better prepare for the worst case scenarios, fail-safe our ventures so they don't seem as paralyzing, and contemplate the more worrying scenario of failing to act. It allows us to see ourselves as stronger than we first imagined. We are more capable than we realize. When we prepare for our worst fears and contemplate the cost of not acting, we are more likely to act. This ties perfectly into the Tao Te Ching passage. When we stop clinging to the self, when we stop identifying ourselves as fragile or as victims defined by our fears, those fears have less power over us and we can act in spite of them. Even physics itself tells us that uncertainty is fundamental and necessary to reality. In quantum physics, something I know nothing about, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle states that the more precisely we try to measure something, the less certain we become about other aspects of it. At a subatomic level, we cannot predict both the position and velocity of a particle at the same time, because there's always an element of uncertainty built into nature itself. We can relate this to life in that the more we try to control and predict every outcome in our lives, the more we try to make our lives certain and predictable, the more we become paralyzed by the fear of the unknown and the uncertain, even if the unknown and uncertain is inevitable. We waste so much energy trying to resist and avoid the inevitability of uncertainty that we may as well spend our energy on acting in spite of that uncertainty rather than trying to resist the inevitable. We may only have a minuscule amount of control in shaping our futures, but that control can only be instigated through action. Ruminating over uncertainty or attempting to control what cannot be controlled is a waste of time and energy, causing more harm than it heals. But learning how to live with uncertainty isn't just a modern problem that we face, as the Stoics in the Tao Te Ching passage proves, but it's also been the key to survival in the harshest conditions. Admiral Jim Stockdale was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 7 years. He observed that the optimists, i.e. those who blindly hoped that they would be free by Christmas and then Easter and then Thanksgiving, were ultimately the ones who broke first. In other words, every time their very high expectations were inevitably not met, their spirit collapsed. On the other hand, however, those who did survive were the ones who acknowledged the brutal truths of their situation while still maintaining the belief that they would prevail. Now, this became known as the Stockdale paradox, which teaches that the key to survival is balancing 2 realities: confronting the harshest truths of your current reality and maintaining unwavering faith that you will ultimately succeed. Stockdale himself said you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever that may be. Now, a similar lesson comes from Viktor Frankl, decades earlier. Frankl was a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who endured the horrors of the Nazi concentration camps. And Frankl noticed that the prisoners who clung to naive optimism, i.e. believing that they would be freed by Christmas and so on, were often the first to die when their hopes were inevitably crushed. It's as if their bodies were crushed by having their dreams crushed. On the other hand, those who did survive found some form of meaning in their suffering. And Frankl thus argued that humans can endure any hardship as long as they believe their suffering has a purpose. He said, those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. And this is where the Tao Te Ching passage, written thousands of years before Frankl was around, becomes so powerful. It warns against relying on the illusions of success and hope. Blindly hoping that life will get better without action is just as dangerous as blindly fearing that it will get worse. Both are traps. What we need is acknowledging our current situation, no matter how terrible, and then acting to make it better without unreasonably high expectations. French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith, or mauvaise foi, a psychological state in which people deceive themselves into believing that they have no choice but to stay in their current situation, even if that situation is unfulfilling or depressing. We'll choose certain depression over an uncertain but potentially meaningful future. We tell ourselves, I have to stay in this job or I have to stay in this relationship, when in reality, we're simply afraid of choosing differently or aiming towards the uncertain. Sartre argued that we are radically free, but that freedom comes with responsibility and unpredictability. Therefore, we can either live a lie and never act on what we truly want, or choose to venture into the unknown truthfully. Albert Camus, another existentialist, wrote about the myth of Sisyphus, a Greek story of a man condemned to push a boulder up a hill for eternity. Camus said that life itself can feel meaningless, like an endless cycle of depressing suffering. But the only way to fight this absurdity, therefore, is to accept that life will be difficult and uncertain, and to create meaning through the actions you take. Life will be difficult, so you might as well push the right boulder up the hill rather than someone else's. Camus once said, "Should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee?" Of course, this wasn't a literal question. It was his way of illustrating the absolute necessity to choose life, to engage in the world and act rather than passively accepting it as it is. Your life as it is now doesn't have to be your fate, but it will be without action. Both Sartre and Camus would agree. Hope for an imagined future, like fear, can be a trap. If we hope that our lives will get better or live in the confines of that hope, because, of course, it can be so very easy to continually tell ourselves one day we will be better, life will be better. But if we never act on it, life will never get better. Instead, you must act. When it comes to pursuing our dreams, our fears are often unfounded. We fear what others will think, fear failure, fear embarrassment, but even if people do judge us, those who matter don't mind, and those who mind don't matter, as Dr. Seuss said. It's better to try, fail, and try again than to fail by never trying at all. We catastrophize uncertain ambitions in our heads, but the real catastrophe is living a life that isn't truly ours. Just as fear is an illusion, so is hope. Just as maintaining a stable but passionless life is tempting, so is maintaining a life filled with hope but little action. The danger is that we risk living in an imagined future, never making that future a reality. Living in the confines of hope can be just as limiting as living within the confines of fear. We all know someone who talks a good game, but who never follows through. So whenever you feel uncertain or fearful of pursuing some grand ambition, remember Joe Rogan's words. If you ever start taking things too seriously, just remember that we are talking monkeys on an organic spaceship flying through the universe. Your time here is short. In the grand scale of the universe, your life is infinitesimally tiny. So why spend it worrying about what others think? Why waste any of your life fearing things that may never happen? Don't live trapped in a fearful future, never venturing outwards, never aiming higher, never embracing the unknown and its potential meaning. And don't live in the comforting illusion of hope, imagining a great future but never acting to make it real. Your future will be uncertain and difficult, whatever you do. So you might as well accept that and act now. Hi guys, just a few more things before you take off. Firstly, thank you so much for watching. It genuinely means a lot to see people watching and liking the content. Second, if you're enjoying the content, please subscribe to the channel. That's the best way you can support the podcast. As you can probably tell, I don't have a team behind me helping with recording or editing the podcast, and I certainly don't have a lot of fancy equipment, so any help or support is greatly appreciated because it will help the podcast grow and get better. And finally, keep on struggling.